While you, while you were superintendent, were there any big incidents that come to mind?
Oh, yeah.
That were a big challenge for you besides these
Yeah.
normal management issues?
I had a rough go in the sense that while I was there were 2 fatalities. You know, we prior to me going there, in the time that I wasn't in Missoula, they had started jumping the ram air parachutes. And when I got there, there was a few foremen, Anderson over at West Yellowstone, Greg Anderson, who was another great person that was always there ready to help me out, and Pat Wilson in Grangeville. Some of those guys and some of the foremans had already had some training in the ram air, and there was a big push. It was pretty divided. There was a camp that wanted to go to ram airs, and there was a camp that absolutely didn't want anything to do with the ram airs. And so we had a lot of meetings with Wagenfer and Mann, and we talked about it, and so the majority of the foremen, including me, you know, we felt that we should at least formally look at it with MTDC involved. Dave Pierce was at MTDC. He was in charge of parachute projects, and to look at it in a very formalized way. So the base managers, selected foremen, we took the training on the ram air, and we got qualified on the ram air. I ended up with 14 jumps on the ram air. So then after we did that first phase evaluation, then we went back to the region and said, well, what we'd like to do is train a corps of ram air jumpers and go operational with them. That's the only way we're going to find out whether we want to transition to a ram air from a round canopy. So we did. We selected our region 1. The other regions, some of the regions were also doing it. And so we had Alaska jumpers come over and help us with the training. And then went through the training. We selected they were all overhead. I think I'd run one of the criteria is they had to have a minimum of 100 static line jumps. They had to be overhead, and they had to volunteer for the program. So we picked a group, and we did the training there in Missoula. We dropped the first load, and everything went fine. And then on the second load, the first jumper on the second load didn't pull the ripcord, and we had a fatality. And so that was, I was in the airplane as a check spotter when that happened. And I had the plane land and we were jumping right there at the base. And so I ran over there, and of course we had a fatality, and that brought a lot of repercussions. There was the camp that didn't want the ram airs, really divided the base. It was a very difficult time, professionally for me as well as personally. And that was a hard pill to swallow. And but we worked our way through it, and then we had to get ready for fire season. And so that was a challenge that happened in 1992.
And who was the fatality?
The fatality was Billy Martin from Grangeville. Yeah. And so we that pretty much did away with the ram air program, and now they're back into it.
But they had it all the time up in Alaska, didn't they?
Right, the Alaska had already converted to the ram air.
What was the thinking? Different terrain up there, or what was it?
Well, the Alaska, they got a lot of tundra. And with the ram air, you can jump a lot more wind. And they can do it in the Great Basin. There's a jump basin, Boise, and then, of course, they open up in Grand Junction. And the Great Basin's a little bit more open. On a personal note, what I always struggled with the ram air was coming into a real tight spot. because it's got a flatter glide path, and you can make it go into a tight spot by sinking it, or you're almost in a stall. And I was really always uncomfortable with, because a lot of jumpers have gotten hurt when they go past the sink and into a stall and the parachute collapses on them. And so I was never totally convinced that that was the canopy we needed to go to. That happened in 1992 on May 31st. And then by the time we were going pretty well after that, that caused a lot of stuff, a lot of ugly stuff happened at the base that we had to work our way through. And we were just coming out of it and getting reestablished and getting settled back in. And then Storm King happened. And one of the things about Storm King is that about a month before Storm King, I went to Helena with 4 other jumpers, and we got a boat, went across, and that was the first time I'd been to Man Gulch. And I went to each and every station where a jumper had fallen, went up to where we thought Saley had gone over the top, and I had already met Saley. As a matter of fact, I got a picture of him and I together, keep it in my Young Men and Fire book. And I remember I sat up on top of that rock, and I was looking down, and one of the young jumpers, a guy named Stevenson, he comes up and he sits down and next to me there, and I remember vividly, I looked at him and I said, you know what, I hope to hell I never have to deal with anything like this. And a month later, it wasn't to the day or whatever, but it was right at a month later, we had Storm King. And I was actually in Silver City at the time. I had jumpers in Springerville, in Santa Fe, in Silver City, had probably close to 75, 80 jumpers down in the Southwest. And they called me from the regional office here and told me that they wanted to pull some of the jumpers from Springerville. We had a little station set up there, satellite base, in Santa Fe, and move them up to Grand Junction. And I told them, fine, wherever you guys need them. And so I was there at Silver City, and I was with Bob Cunningham, another Silver City jumper, and Todd Onken, 2 of my overhead, 2 of my foremans. And we were getting ready to go eat. And that was before everybody carried cell phones. And I actually had a motel room, and even though my parents lived in Hurley, I had a motel room there at a hotel there in Silver City, and the phone rang. And I turned around and walked away from it because it was late. It was about 5 o'clock, and I'd been on the go for several days. But something made me turn around and go back, and I took the phone call, and it was Sabino Archuleta, who was up on the mountain when it took off, and he called me and he said, hey Benny, he said, we got burned over. I said, what do you mean you got burned over? We got burned over and there's some people died. And I said, any of our guys? And he said, yeah, I think so. And I said, where are you? We're in Glenwood Springs. I said, okay, let me make some phone calls. So Bob Cunningham and Todd had gone over, and as they were leaving, before I went to the phone, I told them, just order me a hamburger. And I knew what restaurant we were going to, so I drove over there. And as soon as I walked in, Cunningham looked at me and he said, something's bad. I said, yeah, we just had a burn over. And I said, we better go start making some phone calls. So I went to dispatch, called the regional office, and there were so many fires, they couldn't get me a charter airplane. So I finally got a flight out of there at 4 o'clock in the morning in a charter airplane to Grand Junction. And Todd Onken went with me, Cunningham, said, you know what, you better not go alone. I said, no, you guys are busy down here. You better stay focused down here. And he said, no, we're not going to let you go alone, Benny. Todd's going to go with you. And there was a time and place when my foreman would stand their ground and I knew they were looking out for me. I said, okay, so Todd went. So we got there and I met the coordinator, Paul Hefner, and I knew him from other dealings. I'd known him for quite a while. And he said, oh, we got you a rental. He said, do you mind taking the district FMO for Primeville up to Glenwood Springs? I said, no, not at all. Because by then, I already knew that 9 Primeville were missing. But we already pretty well knew, because I had talked to a lot of the jumpers on the phone by then that had survived. And so we had a pretty good picture of what had gone on. So anyway, the district FMO for Primeville comes out, and it's a guy named Bruce Cheney. Bruce Cheney, I had not seen him since June of 1972, and he was a squad leader at Redmond, Oregon, and he was one of my trainers. And we look at each other, and I remember he says, what a hell of a way to see each other again, huh, Benny? I said, yeah. So we drove up to Glenwood Springs, and got to the motel where the rest of his crew was, and I'll never forget these young kids that were sitting up and down the stairway to the second floor. They were leaning over the balcony, and I stopped. I remember we were in a convertible Jeep with a canvas top, and he got out of the Jeep and they saw him, and they all immediately flocked around him. And of course they were pretty emotional, and so I just said, it's time for me to leave, and so I just left. And we already knew where the jumpers were, so we got to the motel where they put the jumpers. And I got out and walked in the foyer, and I met Dave Bunnell. Dave Bunnell was a fire staff on the Flathead at the time. And Dave Bunnell and I had butted heads over the years on jumper use. We weren't exactly the best of friends, but we certainly have a totally different relationship after what we went through together. But anyway, he was there. He says, Benny, they won't talk to anybody. They said they're not talking to anybody till you get here. And I said, where are they? They're on the 4th floor. So I went up, and the first one I met was Sarah Doring. Got off the elevator and got all the jumpers together, and you know, they were very, very collected, distraught, but collected. Pardon?
How many were there?
Well, the whole bunch that deployed on the Lunch Ridge, what were there, 9? And I think there was 9. I might be wrong on the exact number. But anyway,